The wind howled through the wooden planks of the railway station, carrying with it the bitter cold of a Wyoming winter that seemed determined to freeze everything in its path. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge in an oppressive white silence. The year was 1885, and the West was still wild, still unforgiving to those who dared to venture into its harsh embrace. Samuel Mackenzie pulled his expensive wool coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he stepped onto the station platform. At 35, he was a man who commanded respect wherever he went, not just because of the vast fortune he had amassed from his sprawling cattle ranch, but because of the quiet authority that seemed to emanate from his very presence. His dark hair was touched with premature gray at the temples, and his piercing blue eyes held a depth of sorrow that few dared to question. 3 years had passed since the fever had taken his beloved wife Margaret and their infant daughter Lucy, and in that time Sam had built walls around his heart as impenetrable as the stone foundations of his mansion. He was here today for a practical purpose, as always. A shipment of expensive veterinary medicines from Chicago was due to arrive on the afternoon train, medicines that would ensure his prize cattle remained healthy through the brutal winter months. Sam Mackenzie left nothing to chance when it came to his business, and his ranch was the most prosperous in 3 counties because of his meticulous attention to detail. As he waited on the platform, stamping his feet against the cold, his gaze wandered across the nearly empty station. The few other travelers huddled close to the small wood stove inside the building, but one figure caught his attention. Sitting alone on a bench at the far end of the platform was a young woman, and even from a distance Sam could see that she was shivering violently. She wore a navy blue dress that had seen better days, and over it a thin cloak that provided little protection against the savage wind. What struck Sam most, however, was the worn leather medical bag clutched tightly in her gloved hands, and the small white cap that marked her as a nurse. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun beneath the cap, and her face, though pale with cold, held an expression of determined dignity that intrigued him despite himself. Eleanor Morrison had been sitting on that bench for nearly 4 hours, and she was beginning to wonder if she would freeze to death before she figured out what to do next. At 28, she had already lived through more disappointment and hardship than many women twice her age, but nothing had prepared her for this moment of complete and utter desolation. She had come west from Boston on the promise of employment as a nurse in Cedar Ridge's medical practice, leaving behind a comfortable life in her family's Beacon Hill mansion. The decision had cost her everything: her engagement to a wealthy banker's son, who had demanded she abandon her nursing career, her family's approval, and ultimately her inheritance, when she refused to conform to their expectations of what a proper lady should be. But the job that had been promised to her in carefully worded letters turned out to be nothing more than an elaborate fraud. The man who had hired her existed only on paper, and the medical practice she was supposed to join was nothing more than a single room above the saloon, currently occupied by a man who claimed to be a doctor, but whose credentials were as questionable as his sobriety. Ellie had exactly $3.47 to her name, not nearly enough for a room at the boarding house, and certainly not enough for a train ticket back east, even if she had been willing to return home in defeat. Pride, her greatest virtue and her most devastating flaw, kept her spine straight, even as her body trembled with cold. Sam found himself walking toward the solitary figure before he had consciously made the decision to do so. There was something about her that reminded him of Margaret, not in appearance, but in the way she held herself with quiet strength, even in the face of obvious adversity. As he drew closer, he could see that her lips were nearly blue with cold, and her breath came in small white puffs that were immediately snatched away by the wind. "Excuse me, miss," Sam said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "Are you waiting for someone?" Ellie looked up, startled by the deep voice that cut through the wind. The man standing before her was tall and imposing, dressed in clothes that spoke of wealth and position. His face was weathered but handsome, with the kind of strong jawline that suggested both determination and stubbornness. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were kind, despite the wariness she could see lurking in their depths. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she replied, her voice steady, despite the chattering of her teeth. "I'm simply waiting for the weather to improve." Sam glanced up at the darkening sky, where the snow showed no signs of letting up. "I'm afraid you might be waiting a very long time, miss. This storm looks like it's settling in for the duration." He paused, studying her face. "My name is Samuel Mackenzie. I own the Triple M Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. If you need somewhere warm to wait out the storm, I'd be happy to offer you accommodation." Suspicion flared in Ellie's green eyes. She had learned to be wary of men who offered help to women in distress, especially when those women were as alone and vulnerable as she currently was. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Mackenzie, but I couldn't possibly impose. I'm sure I'll be able to find suitable lodging here in town." "Have you tried the boarding house?" Sam asked gently. "Mrs. Henderson is a good woman, but she charges $2 a night, and that's when she has rooms available." The slight tightening around Ellie's eyes told Sam everything he needed to know about her financial situation. He felt an unexpected surge of protective instinct, one that he had not experienced since Margaret's death. "Look, miss, I'm sorry. I don't know your name." "Morrison," Ellie said quietly. "Eleanor Morrison." "Miss Morrison, I can see that you're a nurse," Sam continued, nodding toward her medical bag. "I lost my wife and daughter 3 years ago because there wasn't proper medical care available when they needed it. If you're here to help people, then you're exactly what this town needs, and I'd consider it an honor to help you get settled." Something in his voice, a note of genuine pain and loss, made Ellie look at him more carefully. She saw the shadow of grief in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he mentioned his family, and she recognized the kind of wound that never fully healed. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Mackenzie," she said softly, "but I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about my employment here. The position I was promised doesn't actually exist." Sam's expression darkened. "You were cheated." "It would appear so." Ellie's voice was steady, but Sam could hear the hurt and anger beneath her composed exterior. "I find myself in rather reduced circumstances as a result." The train whistle sounded in the distance, and Sam knew he had only a few minutes to convince this proud, stubborn woman to accept his help. Something about Eleanor Morrison had awakened feelings in him that he had thought buried forever, and he found himself unwilling to walk away and leave her to freeze on this platform. "Miss Morrison," he said urgently, "I'm not asking you to trust me with anything more than getting you out of this cold. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, runs the household, and there are several guest rooms that haven't been used in years. You could stay until you decide what you want to do next, and in return, well, I have 15 men working on my ranch, and they're always getting banged up somehow. I'm sure they could use the attention of a qualified nurse." Ellie studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. What she saw instead was a man who seemed as lonely and lost as she felt, despite his obvious wealth and success. "Why are you helping me?" she asked bluntly. Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching the snow swirl around them. "Because 3 years ago, I would have given everything I owned for someone with your skills to be available when my family needed help. Maybe if I help you now, it will balance the scales somehow." The train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and grinding of brakes, and Sam collected his shipment of veterinary supplies while Ellie made her decision. By the time he returned to the platform, she was standing beside her small traveling bag, her medical kit clutched in her hand. "I accept your offer, Mr. Mackenzie," she said formally, "but I insist on paying for my room and board as soon as I'm able to find employment." "That's between you and Mrs. Chen," Sam replied with the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "She runs the household finances with an iron fist." The ride to the Triple M Ranch took nearly 2 hours through the blowing snow, but Sam's carriage was well built and warm, with thick blankets and heated bricks for their feet. As they traveled, Ellie found herself relaxing slightly in the company of this quiet, thoughtful man who seemed to understand the value of comfortable silence. The ranch house, when it finally appeared through the snow, was far grander than anything Ellie had expected. It was a sprawling 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with warm light glowing from its many windows. The surrounding buildings spoke of prosperity and careful management, and even in the storm she could see that this was an operation run with precision and pride. Mrs. Chen, Sam's housekeeper, was a small, efficient Chinese woman who took one look at Ellie's frozen state and immediately whisked her away to a warm room with a blazing fireplace and orders to soak in a hot bath until she could feel her fingers again. The room was beautifully furnished, but clearly hadn't been used in some time, and Ellie found herself wondering about the story behind the shadows she had seen in Sam Mackenzie's eyes. Over the following days, as the storm raged outside, Ellie began to understand the complex man who had rescued her from the railway platform. Sam was unfailingly polite but distant, treating her with the courtesy due to a guest while maintaining a careful emotional distance. He worked from dawn until well past dark, throwing himself into the management of his ranch with an intensity that spoke of a man trying to outrun his demons. But when one of his ranch hands, a young cowboy named Billy, was kicked by a horse and suffered what appeared to be a serious head injury, everything changed. Ellie was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Chen prepare dinner when the men carried Billy into the house, his face pale and blood trickling from a wound on his forehead. Without hesitation, she took charge, directing them to lay him on the kitchen table while she examined his injuries with skilled hands. "He needs to be kept still and watched for signs of concussion," she told Sam, who was hovering anxiously nearby. "The cut will need stitching, but more importantly, we need to monitor him for any changes in his pupils or level of consciousness." Working by lamplight, Ellie cleaned and stitched Billy's wound with steady hands, her training taking over as she fell into the familiar rhythm of caring for a patient. Sam watched her work, seeing the transformation from the uncertain woman he had found at the train station to the confident medical professional she truly was. "Where did you train?" he asked quietly as she finished bandaging Billy's head. "Massachusetts General Hospital," Ellie replied, not looking up from her patient. "I was one of the first women they accepted into their nursing program. It wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle." Billy recovered fully over the next few days, and word of Ellie's skill spread quickly among the ranch hands. Soon she was treating everything from cuts and bruises to a case of pneumonia that could have killed the affected cowboy if left untreated. Sam found himself making excuses to check on her patients, drawn by the gentle competence with which she handled each case. It was during one of these visits that the conversation turned personal for the first time since her arrival. "So you gave up a lot to become a nurse," Sam observed, watching her change the dressing on a rope burn. "I gained more than I lost," Ellie replied, though there was a note of sadness in her voice. "My family couldn't understand why I would want to soil my hands with such work when I could have been a perfectly ornamental wife to a banker." "Their loss," Sam said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her look up at him in surprise. "What about you?" she asked. "Mrs. Chen told me you built all of this for your wife and daughter." Sam's face tightened, and for a moment Ellie thought he wouldn't answer. "Margaret always said she wanted to live somewhere beautiful, where she could see the mountains from her bedroom window. I bought this land the day after I proposed to her, and we designed the house together. Lucy was born in the master bedroom upstairs." "It must be difficult living with all these memories." "Some days are harder than others," Sam admitted. "But leaving would feel like abandoning them somehow." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Hawkins, a man whose reputation for corruption was well known throughout the territory. He was accompanied by Dr. Jameson, the alleged physician whose questionable practice Ellie had discovered upon her arrival in Cedar Ridge. "Mackenzie," Hawkins said without preamble, "I hear you've got someone here practicing medicine without a license." Sam's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Miss Morrison is a qualified nurse who has been providing care to my employees. I wasn't aware that helping injured people required a sheriff's approval." "The lady ain't got no right to be treating folks around here," Dr. Jameson interjected, his words slightly slurred from the alcohol on his breath. "I'm the only medical authority in this county." Ellie stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "I have my certification from Massachusetts General Hospital, and I've been practicing nursing for 6 years. I've done nothing but provide basic medical care to people who needed it." "Massachusetts don't mean nothing out here, missy," Hawkins sneered. "And Dr. Jameson here says you've been interfering with his practice." "What practice?" Ellie shot back, her anger finally overriding her caution. "You spend your days drinking in the saloon while people suffer from ailments that could be easily treated with proper care." The confrontation might have escalated further, but Sam stepped between them, his presence commanding enough to make both men take a step back. "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave my property," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that brooked no argument. After they left, Sam turned to Ellie with concern. "I'm afraid you've made some dangerous enemies. Hawkins and Jameson have a profitable arrangement. They charge people for medical care that's worthless at best and harmful at worst. Your presence here threatens their livelihood." "I won't be intimidated into letting people suffer," Ellie said firmly. "If they want to fight me, they'll find I'm not as helpless as they think." It was in that moment, seeing the fierce determination in her green eyes, that Sam Mackenzie fell completely and irrevocably in love with Eleanor Morrison. The realization hit him like a physical blow, followed immediately by a crushing wave of guilt. How could he betray Margaret's memory by caring for another woman? But over the following weeks, as winter slowly gave way to spring, Sam found it impossible to deny his growing feelings. Ellie had brought life back to his house in ways he hadn't expected. Her laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for too long, and her presence seemed to chase away the shadows that had haunted him for 3 years. The crisis came on a warm April morning, when Sam was away in town arranging for supplies. Ellie was tending to a ranch hand who had been injured in a fall when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. Looking out the window, she saw Sheriff Hawkins leading a group of armed men toward the house. Mrs. Chen quickly gathered the household staff, but there was nowhere to run. Hawkins had brought enough men to surround the entire compound, and his intentions were clear when he dismounted with a pair of handcuffs in his hand. "Eleanor Morrison," he called out, "you're under arrest for practicing medicine without a license and endangering the public welfare." "On whose authority?" Ellie demanded, stepping onto the front porch with her head held high. "Judge Crawford signed the warrant himself," Hawkins replied with a cruel smile. "Course he's a good friend of Dr. Jameson's, so he understands the serious nature of your crimes." It was then that Sam appeared, riding hard from town with several of his most trusted men behind him. He had heard about the warrant from a friend in the sheriff's office and had raced home, fearing exactly this scenario. "Take your hands off her, Hawkins," Sam commanded, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Now, Mackenzie, don't make this harder than it has to be," the sheriff replied, but his hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "The lady's got to face justice for what she's done." "What she's done is save lives," Sam said, stepping protectively in front of Ellie. "If you want to arrest her, you'll have to go through me first." The standoff stretched taut as both sides measured their resolve. Sam's men were outnumbered, but they were fiercely loyal and well-armed. Hawkins had the law on his side, but he knew that Sam Mackenzie had friends in high places who might not appreciate seeing an innocent woman railroaded by a corrupt sheriff. It was Ellie who broke the tension by stepping forward. "I'll come with you," she said quietly. "I won't have blood shed on my account." "Like hell you will," Sam said, turning to face her. In that moment, with danger closing in around them, he could no longer hide what was in his heart. "I love you, Eleanor Morrison, and I'll be damned if I let them destroy you for the crime of caring about people." Before she could respond, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the passion and desperation of a man who had found love again against all odds. When they broke apart, there were tears in Ellie's eyes, but her voice was steady. "I love you too, Sam Mackenzie," she said. "Which is why I can't let you throw your life away for me." But even as she spoke, the sound of more horses could be heard approaching. This time, however, the riders brought hope instead of threat. Led by Doc Harrison, a respected physician from the territorial capital, came a group of ranchers and townspeople whose lives had been touched by Ellie's care. "Sheriff Hawkins," Doc Harrison said as he dismounted, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." "No misunderstanding, Doc," Hawkins replied, but his confidence was wavering. "Got a warrant for this woman's arrest. A warrant based on false charges filed by Marcus Jameson, who, as it turns out, has no medical degree and has been practicing medicine illegally for the past 5 years, Harrison said, producing an official-looking document. "I've been investigating complaints about medical care in this county, and I'm here to inform you that Miss Morrison is not only qualified to practice nursing, but she's also been appointed as the official territorial health inspector for this region." The wind went out of Hawkins's sails as he realized that his corrupt arrangement with the fake doctor had been exposed. Dr. Jameson, who had been hanging back behind the sheriff's men, quietly mounted his horse and slipped away, while attention was focused elsewhere. In the aftermath of the confrontation, as the sheriff and his men retreated in defeat, Sam and Ellie found themselves alone on the front porch of the ranch house. The spring evening was warm and filled with the scent of wildflowers, and for the first time in months, Ellie felt truly safe. "So," Sam said, taking her hand in his, "it seems you're going to be staying in Cedar Ridge after all." "It seems so," Ellie agreed, smiling up at him. "That is, if a certain rancher doesn't mind having the territorial health inspector as a neighbor." "I was hoping she might consider being more than a neighbor," Sam said, dropping to one knee on the wooden porch. "Eleanor Morrison, will you marry me? Will you help me turn this house back into a home?" Through her tears of joy, Ellie could see the mountains that Margaret Mackenzie had loved, painted gold and purple by the setting sun. She thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment, from the frozen railway platform to this porch where a good man was offering her his heart and his future. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, Samuel Mackenzie, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place 6 weeks later in the parlor of the ranch house, with Mrs. Chen as matron of honor and half the county in attendance. Doc Harrison performed the ceremony, and afterward, Sam presented Ellie with a gift that made her cry all over again, a brand new medical bag, engraved with her new name and the date of their wedding. But the real gift was what they built together in the years that followed. Ellie established the first real medical clinic in Cedar Ridge, funded by Sam's wealth, but guided by her vision of what frontier healthcare could become. They traveled throughout the territory, bringing medical care to remote ranches and mining camps, their love story becoming legend among the people they served. The house on the Triple M ranch filled with laughter again, and eventually with the voices of the 3 children that Ellie and Sam raised together. But they never forgot the lessons that their love had taught them about second chances, about the courage required to open your heart again after loss, and about the way that 2 broken people could heal each other by choosing to build something beautiful together. Years later, when visitors asked about the portrait that hung in the main hallway, a painting of a young woman in a nurse's uniform standing beside a tall rancher against the backdrop of the Wyoming mountains, Sam would tell them about the day he found his wife freezing at a railway station and how their love had indeed changed the West forever, one life saved at a time.